You can tell a lot about a man by what he assumes in the dark. Marcus Ellison thought the moment the red and blue lights flooded his rearview mirror and turned the wet street into broken strips of color. He had been driving home through the north side of Brookhaven just after 11 p.m., the kind of quiet suburban stretch where porch lights glowed warm behind trimmed hedges and every parked SUV looked polished even under rain. His hands stayed steady on the wheel as he eased his black sedan to the curb, the windshield ticking softly beneath the last thin sweep of drizzle. He was tired in the honest way only long service could make a man tired, with a stiff collar, a cooling cup of coffee in the console, and the faint ache behind his eyes that came from too many meetings, too many reports, too many people asking for order while feeding the very chaos they claimed to hate. Still, he breathed slow. Still, he waited. The patrol car door opened with a hard metallic click, and the young officer who stepped out moved with the kind of confidence that had not yet been tested by enough truth. Officer Bradley Cole did not approach like a man checking on a driver. He approached like a man who had already decided the story before hearing the first word. His flashlight cut through the rain-streaked glass and landed on Marcus's face with a cold, searching glare. "License and registration," he said, not rude enough for complaint, not respectful enough to hide what sat beneath the words. Marcus handed them over without argument. His movements were measured, almost gentle, the habits of a man who knew how quickly stillness could be mistaken for guilt and dignity mistaken for defiance. Cole glanced at the license, then back at Marcus, then at the car, as if the pieces in front of him refused to fit the picture in his head. A black man in a quiet neighborhood after dark. A clean car, but not flashy. A tailored shirt, but no uniform. Calm eyes. No fear. That, somehow, seemed to bother him more than anything. Rainwater slid down the edge of the side mirror and dropped to the pavement in a steady rhythm. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and fell silent. Marcus could smell wet asphalt, brewed coffee, and the faint trace of leather from the steering wheel beneath his palms. "Step out of the vehicle," Cole said. No explanation. No warning. Just a command dropped into the night like it had every right to be obeyed without question. Marcus opened the door and stepped into the cool air, his dress shoes touching the slick pavement with quiet precision. The streetlights painted a pale silver line across the shoulders of his dark coat. He could feel eyes behind curtains. He could feel the familiar shape of judgment arriving before facts. But his face did not change. That was the part men like Cole never expected. Not anger. Not panic. Just composure, so complete it felt almost like a mirror held up to their own disorder. Cole motioned him toward the hood of the car, and Marcus placed his hands there without resistance, feeling the cold metal under his fingertips, the rain-chilled surface smooth as glass. Then, across the street, a front door opened 2 inches. A teenager on a porch lifted a phone, and in the hush between one breath and the next, Marcus looked at the glowing body cam on Cole's chest, listened to the radio crackle at his shoulder, and said in a low, even voice, "Officer, you may want to listen very carefully to what comes through that radio next." The rain did not fall hard anymore. It only lingered, tapping lightly on the hood in thin, patient drops, as if the whole street were holding its breath. Officer Bradley Cole stared at Marcus for half a second after that quiet warning, and in that half second his expression shifted from irritation to something sharper, something more defensive. Men like Cole did not like being told anything by people they had already placed beneath them. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he said, though Marcus had not moved an inch. His voice came out tighter this time, less controlled, like the night had slipped a little beyond his grip. Marcus kept his palms resting flat against the cool metal, shoulders squared, eyes lowered just enough to deny the moment any fuel. He had learned a long time ago that composure could do what anger never could. It exposed people. It gave them room to reveal themselves fully, without interruption, without excuse. Across the street, the teenager on the porch adjusted his phone and took one slow step forward into the yellow porch light. A woman inside the house next door parted her curtain with 2 careful fingers. A delivery van rolled past the intersection, then slowed, brake lights glowing soft red through the mist. The scene had already begun to change. It was no longer a private stop on a dark road. It was becoming a record. Cole turned toward his cruiser and lifted the radio microphone from his shoulder, but there was a stiffness in the motion now, a crack in the swagger that had carried him to Marcus's window. He read off the plate number first, then the license, each word clipped and hurried. The dispatcher answered with the flat professionalism of someone near the end of a long shift. There was a pause. Static. Then a second request for confirmation. Cole repeated the name from the license, more carefully this time. Marcus Ellison. The name settled into the wet air between them. Marcus could feel the cold soaking faintly through the cuffs of his shirt, could smell the mineral scent rising from the pavement, could hear the soft electric hum from the patrol lights cutting color over parked cars and trimmed lawns. He did not turn his head. He did not smile. He only listened. Somewhere beneath the fatigue in his chest was something quieter and deeper than anger. It was recognition, not of the officer, not exactly, but of the pattern. The assumption first, the authority second, the explanation never. He had spent half his career trying to train it out of departments that swore it did not exist. He had sat in conference rooms under fluorescent lights while people used phrases like split-second judgment and community optics and officer discretion, dressing old prejudice in cleaner language and hoping that made it less corrosive. But out here, in the rain, under the pulsing glow of a body cam and the watchful eyes of strangers, language got stripped back down to instinct. And instinct had told Bradley Cole exactly who he thought Marcus was before a single fact entered the night. The radio cracked again. This time the dispatcher's tone was different. More alert. More careful. Unit 12, confirm the driver name again. Cole swallowed, glanced once toward Marcus, and pressed the button. Marcus Ellison, he said. The teenager across the street lowered his phone for a moment, as if even he could feel the air tightening. Then the dispatcher came back, each word clear enough to cut through rain. Unit 12, be advised, registered owner is Captain Marcus Ellison, Brookhaven Police Department. Nothing moved for a beat. Not the porch curtain. Not the van at the corner. Not even Cole. The only thing still alive in the silence was the red blink of the body cam on his chest, recording every second that came next. Cole did not speak right away. The name hung in the wet night like a church bell after midnight, still vibrating even after the sound was gone. Captain Marcus Ellison, Brookhaven Police Department. It was amazing how fast confidence could drain from a man when certainty left him with nowhere to stand. A moment earlier, Officer Bradley Cole had carried himself with the stiff authority of someone performing power for an audience only he could see. Now that same authority looked borrowed, thin at the edges, too small for the silence gathering around him. Marcus remained exactly where he was, hands steady on the hood, posture unchanged, his reflection broken by beads of rain sliding over the black paint. He did not turn around. He did not rush to fill the space. He had spent too many years in law enforcement not to understand the value of letting truth arrive under its own weight. The teenager across the street lifted his phone again, slower this time, as if the scene had shifted from neighborhood drama to something heavier, something that might matter tomorrow morning when the sun came up and people started asking questions. The woman behind the curtain stepped closer to the glass. At the corner, the delivery van remained still, engine idling low, its headlights washing pale gold across the wet curb. The whole block seemed to lean inward, quiet and listening. Cole swallowed and looked down at the license in his hand, as though maybe it had changed while he was reading it. Marcus could almost feel the officer trying to rearrange the last 3 minutes in his mind, searching for some version of events that would make him appear cautious instead of biased, professional instead of threatened, justified instead of exposed. That was the part men often did not understand about moments like this. The danger was never only in what they did. It was in what their actions revealed about what they had already believed. A second unit turned onto the street at the far end of the block, tires whispering over wet pavement. Its headlights cut across the hedges and brick mailboxes before coming to a stop behind Cole's patrol car. Sergeant Elena Brooks stepped out, one hand on the door, the other brushing rain from her sleeve. She was a woman who moved with the kind of efficiency that made small talk feel unnecessary. Her eyes went first to Cole, then to Marcus at the hood, then to the body cam blinking red on Cole's chest. In one glance, her expression changed. Not into shock exactly, into understanding. Fast, sharp, complete. "Officer," she said, and that single word landed with more force than shouting ever could. Cole straightened, suddenly eager, suddenly awkward, like a student caught standing in the wrong seat when the principal walks in. "Sergeant, I did not know, he began, but Brooks lifted one hand and stopped him before the excuse could gather shape. Marcus slowly pushed himself upright and turned to face them both. Rain clung to his shoulders in dark specks. His shirt collar was damp, his face calm, his eyes steady in a way that made the flashing lights seem childish around him. He looked first at Sergeant Brooks, then at Officer Cole, and what sat in his expression was not triumph. That would have been easier for everyone. It was disappointment, older and heavier than anger, the kind that came from seeing the same wound open again in places that promised healing. Brooks exhaled once and said, very quietly, Captain Ellison. The title changed the temperature of the street. Cole's fingers tightened around the license. The teenager lowered his phone just enough to stare. And Marcus, still composed, still measured, looked at the young officer who had decided who he was before asking a single real question and said, now we can begin with the truth. For a long second, nobody moved. The rain kept falling in a fine silver mist, soft enough to look harmless, steady enough to soak through a shirt collar and remind every person on that street that some moments did not pass quickly just because you wanted them to. Sergeant Elena Brooks stood with one hand resting on the open door of her unit, her face unreadable in the shifting wash of red and blue light. Officer Bradley Cole still held Marcus Ellison's license, but now it looked less like identification and more like evidence. Marcus watched him without hurry. He had seen this kind of silence before. It was the silence that came when a man realized the story in his head had collapsed, but his pride had not caught up yet. It was the silence between exposure and excuse. Give the captain his license, Brooks said at last. Her voice was level, almost quiet, and that made it land harder. Cole stepped forward at once, too quickly, as if speed might repair judgment. Captain, I did not realize, he began, extending the card with fingers that had lost their earlier certainty. Marcus took the license and glanced at it only briefly before sliding it back into his wallet. The leather was damp from the weather, and when he folded it closed, the small sound seemed to cut through the whole block. He did not answer the apology, not because he had not heard it, but because some words arrived too early to mean anything. Across the street, the teenager on the porch lowered his phone just enough to look from Cole to Marcus and back again, eyes wide with the kind of attention that only comes when someone realizes they are watching more than an argument. They are watching a truth. The porch light behind him made the mist glow amber. The woman at the window next door had opened her curtain wider now. Even the delivery driver at the corner had stepped out halfway from his van, one hand on the door frame, not wanting to leave, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to pretend this was nothing. Marcus adjusted the cuff of his shirt slowly, smoothing rain-dark fabric over his wrist. There was no rush in him. No need to prove control. Real authority never needed volume. Tell me why you stopped me, he said. The question was plain. No anger. No edge. That was what made it difficult. Cole opened his mouth, closed it, then glanced toward Brooks as if searching for a bridge that was no longer there. Your vehicle matched a general description, he said finally. It was the kind of sentence Marcus had heard too many times in too many forms. Vague enough to protect the speaker. Empty enough to mean almost anything. Marcus looked past him to the quiet houses, the trimmed hedges, the wet flags hanging still from front porches. Then he looked back. What description? He asked. Cole hesitated. Suspicious vehicle in the area? Marcus let that sit between them, thin and weak under the rain. Suspicious because of what? He asked. Brooks shifted her weight, not uncomfortable, but alert. She knew what was happening now. Marcus was not pushing for humiliation. He was pulling the truth into the open one careful inch at a time, where it could no longer hide inside policy language and convenient uncertainty. Cole looked toward the body cam on his chest as though only now remembering that every second since the stop had been captured, his tone, his posture, his choices, all of it sealed in digital memory that did not care how he explained himself later. The red recording light blinked steadily, indifferent and merciless. Marcus noticed the flicker of understanding in the younger officer's face, the dawning realization that the most dangerous witness in the street was not the teenager with the phone or the woman behind the curtain. It was his own conduct. I asked you a direct question, officer, Marcus said, still calm, still measured. What made the vehicle suspicious? Cole swallowed again. Water gathered at the edge of his jaw and dropped to the pavement. The lights from the cruisers flashed over his uniform, catching the nameplate, the badge, the damp shine of his shoulder patch. He looked very young all at once. Not innocent, just unformed. The kind of man who had mistaken authority for instinct and instinct for truth. Brooks took one step closer, eyes fixed on him. "Answer the captain," she said. And under the cold blinking lights, with neighbors watching and the camera still recording, Bradley Cole finally understood that whatever he said next was going to follow him much farther than this street. Bradley Cole looked as if the rain itself had turned heavy on his shoulders. His jaw worked once before any sound came out, and when it did, the words were smaller than the ones he had used at the driver's window, stripped of their edge, stripped of the certainty that had carried them a few minutes earlier. "The call said there was a dark sedan moving slowly through the neighborhood," he said. The explanation landed weak and unfinished, the kind of answer built to survive paperwork, not truth. Marcus Ellison stood with his coat damp at the seams and his face calm in the flashing wash of patrol lights. He had heard hundreds of explanations in conference rooms and review boards over the years, all polished until they sounded procedural, all thin enough to split when pressed by facts. "A dark sedan," Marcus repeated, not mocking him, only returning the words with their emptiness intact. He glanced once down the quiet street, where brick homes stood in careful rows and rainwater shivered along the curbs. "There are 3 dark sedans on this block right now." Nobody answered. The teenager on the porch shifted his weight and lowered his phone only an inch, as if afraid that moving too much might somehow disturb the truth forming in front of him. Sergeant Elena Brooks kept her eyes on Cole, giving him no shelter, no soft exit. The red light on the body cam blinked steadily against the young officer's chest, patient and unforgiving. Marcus let the silence work a little longer. Then he asked, "So tell me what made mine the one you chose." Cole looked down the street, then toward his cruiser, then briefly at Brooks, but there was nowhere useful left to look. His face had the strained stillness of a man trying to build a ladder out of air. "It matched the area and the timing," he said, and the driver appeared nervous. This time Marcus almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. Only fatigue. Old, deep fatigue. "I was sitting still with both hands on the steering wheel," he said. "You had not even reached my window when you decided what I was." The words were quiet, but they moved across the street with more force than shouting. The woman at the window let the curtain fall from her fingers. The delivery driver by the van stayed frozen with one foot on the pavement, as though leaving now would feel like turning away from something important. Brooks drew a slow breath through her nose. She knew the shape of this moment. The facts were no longer scattered. They were aligning. Marcus took one step closer, not threatening, only present, and rain slid from the shoulder of his coat in a thin line. "Officer, I asked for the reason for the stop," he said. "You have given me location, weather, and a color. None of that explains your tone. None of that explains your assumptions. None of that explains why I was treated like I did not belong on a public road in my own city." Cole's mouth opened, then shut again. His eyes flickered to Marcus's face and away just as fast. It was there now, unmistakable even to him. Not only fear of discipline, something harder to bear. Recognition. Marcus could see it happening in real time. The painful instant when a man understands that what he called instinct was prejudice wearing a badge. Brooks stepped forward until she stood beside Cole, not close enough to comfort him, only close enough to make clear that he would stand in the full weight of this himself. "Your body cam is on," she said. "Your stop was recorded from first contact." Her voice was level, but the meaning underneath it was steel. Marcus reached into his coat slowly and removed his department credentials, the leather fold darkened by moisture, the gold insignia catching a hard flash of blue. He did not snap it open with drama. He simply held it where Cole could see. "Captain, Brookhaven Police Department." Cole stared at it, as if the truth had become visible in metal. Marcus watched him for another second, then lowered the credentials and said, "Tonight is not about the fact that you stopped a captain. It is about the reason you thought you could stop a black man this way and call it normal." The sentence settled over the street like a final layer of rain. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even the radio chatter from the cruisers seemed to fall quieter, as though the night itself were listening. Brooks turned her head toward Marcus, her expression sharpened by something like respect and regret at once. Then she looked back at Cole, and said the words that made his face lose the last of its color. "Officer, remove your body cam and place it on the hood. Internal review starts now." For the first time that night, Bradley Cole obeyed without trying to control how it looked. His hands moved to the small camera clipped to his chest, slower than before, careful now. As if even touching the device required permission he no longer felt he had. When he placed it on the rain-damp hood of the patrol car, the red recording light still blinked for a second, then went dark, leaving behind a silence that felt larger than sound. No one spoke. The neighborhood, so polished and orderly a few minutes earlier, seemed suddenly stripped down to essentials. Wet pavement, porch lights, breath and cool air, the metallic scent of rain rising from the street. Marcus Ellison stood beside his sedan and looked at the body cam resting on the hood between beads of water and reflections of blue light. He had testified in hearings. He had reviewed misconduct reports. He had spent long mornings in rooms without windows listening to men explain away the damage they caused with phrases like heightened awareness and officer safety. But there was something different about seeing the evidence before anyone had the chance to wrap it in language. There it was. A small black device on a wet hood under neighborhood lights. Not opinion. Not rumor. Not politics. Proof. Sergeant Elena Brooks reached for a pair of evidence gloves from her unit and slipped them on with the calm efficiency of habit. Her face remained composed, but Marcus noticed the tightness near her eyes, the quiet anger of someone who had hoped her department was moving forward and had just watched the past step out of a patrol car. She lifted the camera carefully and placed it into an evidence bag from the kit in her trunk. The plastic crackled in the night, a brittle sound that carried farther than it should have. Across the street, the teenager lowered his phone for good this time, not because the moment was over, but because it had changed shape. It was no longer spectacle. It was consequence. The woman at the window drew back slowly, leaving only the warm square of lamplight behind the glass. Even the delivery driver at the corner climbed back into his van without starting it, sitting still with both hands on the wheel as though he understood that leaving too soon might feel disrespectful. Marcus rolled one shoulder beneath his damp coat and let out a slow breath. The cold had begun to settle into the fabric at his cuffs, and there was a faint pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with memory. Nights like this were never only one night. They carried every other version of themselves inside them. Every stop that began with suspicion and ended with paperwork. Every black driver who had chosen calm because calm was safer than outrage. Every person who had been told they were imagining what was plain as daylight to anyone willing to look. Brooks zipped the evidence bag closed and turned toward him. "Captain," she said, her voice lower now, stripped of command and left with something more human. "I am sorry this happened." Marcus met her eyes. He believed she meant it. That mattered. But meaning it was not the same as fixing it. "I know," he said. And then, after a pause that let the words settle honestly between them, he added, "But I am tired of apologies arriving after the damage." Brooks held his gaze and nodded once. No defense. No easy reassurance. Just acknowledgement. That, too, mattered. Cole stood a few feet away, bare-chested only in the symbolic sense now, stripped of the confidence that had wrapped him earlier in the stop. The uniform was still there. The badge was still there, but authority had left him, and what remained looked smaller, uncertain, almost boyish in the cold light. Marcus turned toward him fully. Rain traced a line from the edge of his collar down the front of his coat. "Do you understand what happened here tonight?" he asked. Cole swallowed and looked down at the pavement before lifting his eyes again. The answer did not come quickly. It came like something dragged up from a depth he had spent years avoiding. "Yes, sir," he said. Marcus did not blink. "Then say it clearly." Cole's face tightened, and for a second it seemed he might reach again for the safer language, the softer excuse, the version of the truth that protected the speaker more than the victim. But the night had moved past that now. The evidence bag sat in Brooks's hand. The neighbors had seen enough. And somewhere beyond the rain and the quiet houses, morning was already on its way. Cole drew a breath that trembled before he mastered it, and opened his mouth to answer. Cole stood in the cold wash of patrol lights with rain collecting at the edge of his brow, and when he finally spoke, his voice no longer sounded like authority. It sounded like effort. "I stopped you because I made assumptions," he said. The words came out low, almost swallowed by the damp air, but Marcus Ellison did not let him hide inside half volume. The captain stood still, shoulders squared beneath his dark coat, face calm in a way that made everyone else seem unsettled by comparison. Louder, Marcus said. Not cruelly. Not to humiliate him. Simply because truth whispered was too close to denial. Cole swallowed and tried again. I made assumptions because you were a black man driving through this neighborhood at night. The sentence landed on the street with a weight that changed everything. It was no longer implied. No longer buried inside phrases like suspicious vehicle or officer discretion. It was spoken aloud under porch lights and rain, in front of a supervising sergeant, a teenager with a phone, a woman behind a living room window, and a city block that had become witness to something it probably preferred to pretend happened somewhere else. Marcus held the silence for a moment after the confession, and in that silence there was no triumph. Only the hard stillness of a man hearing something he already knew, but needed said plainly because plain truth was the only place any repair could begin. Sergeant Elena Brooks kept the evidence bag at her side and looked at Cole with the expression of someone watching a door close for good. Not because a single sentence ended a career by itself, but because some sentences revealed the structure underneath everything else. Cole had not merely made a bad stop. He had told on the instinct that guided him before facts arrived. Marcus glanced once toward the houses lining the street. Their brick fronts and glowing windows looked almost too neat for the moment unfolding in front of them. This was the kind of block where people liked to believe the world stayed orderly as long as lawns were trimmed and packages arrived on time. But injustice did not care about zip codes. It rode in squad cars. It stood on sidewalks. It wore polished boots and believed its own version of caution. The teenager on the porch lowered his phone slowly, his young face caught between disbelief and understanding, as if he had just watched adulthood explain itself in a way no classroom ever could. Marcus turned back to Cole. And if my name had not come over that radio, he asked. Cole did not answer. His eyes dropped to the wet pavement where the patrol lights smeared red and blue across shallow puddles like colors trying to outrun each other. Marcus took one measured step closer. If I had been a teacher, a mechanic, a father coming home from a late shift, a man with no rank to interrupt your assumptions, what would this stop have become? Still Cole said nothing. He did not have a lie left that would survive contact with the question. Brooks shifted her gaze from him to Marcus, and in her eyes was the recognition that the captain had moved the night beyond misconduct and into meaning. This was not about one officer standing exposed on a curb. It was about every unseen version of the same stop that ended with no witnesses, no recording, no title powerful enough to force a second look. Marcus let out a slow breath. The rain had thinned to a mist so light it seemed to float rather than fall, silver under the street lamps, cold against his cheeks. He thought of the meeting waiting for him in the morning, the policy review he had been scheduled to lead, the stack of complaints that always arrived thinner than the truth, because people got tired of writing down pain for systems that preferred statistics to stories. He had planned to argue for stronger review standards, mandatory bias intervention, expanded community oversight. Now the night itself had handed him something no memo could match. Brooks seemed to understand it too. Her eyes flicked to the evidence bag, then back to Marcus, and for the first time since arriving, a different kind of tension entered her face. Not uncertainty. Foresight. She knew this would not end on the street. Marcus looked at Cole one last time and said, "Tomorrow morning, there is a department meeting on racial bias and traffic enforcement." Cole lifted his head, confusion and dread mixing in his expression. Marcus's voice stayed even, almost quiet. "I was on my way home from final preparation for that meeting when you stopped me." The words settled like a final turn of the key, and Sergeant Brooks closed her eyes for the briefest second, because she understood before Cole did that what happened next would reach far beyond Brookhaven's quiet north side. The words hung in the mist long after Marcus Ellison finished speaking. Final preparation for the department meeting on racial bias and traffic enforcement. That was where he had been coming from. That was what Bradley Cole had interrupted. And now the street itself felt different, as if every wet curb and shuttered window had leaned in to hear the irony settle where excuses used to stand. Cole looked at Marcus as though the ground beneath him had shifted half an inch and left him off balance. For the first time all night, his expression was not defensive. It was exposed. Not because he had been caught stopping the wrong man, but because he had revealed the kind of thinking Marcus had spent years trying to drag into daylight. Sergeant Elena Brooks held the sealed evidence bag at her side and exhaled slowly through her nose. The teenager across the street stood perfectly still on the porch, phone lowered now, no longer filming but still witnessing, and in the house beside him the curtain remained open, the warm living room light glowing onto the rain-dark glass like a silent jury. Marcus drew a slow breath and felt the cold air settle deep in his chest. Fatigue pressed at the back of his neck, but his voice stayed even when he spoke again. "This is where most people get it wrong," he said. "They think the worst part is that you did this to a captain." Cole did not move. Water slid from the brim of his patrol cap and disappeared into the dark line of his collar. Marcus looked at him without anger, and somehow that made the moment heavier. "The worst part," he continued, "is that you felt comfortable doing it before you knew who I was." The sentence crossed the space between them with quiet precision. Brooks lowered her eyes for a second, not out of discomfort, but because she knew it was true. Rank had not created the injustice. Rank had only interrupted it. Marcus could see the understanding working through Cole now, slow and painful, like a light coming on in a room a man had spent years keeping shut. There were no easy words left. No clean report language. No safe retreat into policy phrases. Only the bare fact that he had looked at a black man in a decent neighborhood at night and allowed suspicion to bloom where professionalism should have stood. "Captain," Cole said at last, his voice rough and unsteady, "I was wrong." Marcus studied him for a moment, not measuring sincerity so much as weight. Wrong was a start, but it was a small word for a large habit. "Yes," Marcus said. "You were." The answer was not cruel. It was final in a different way, like a door closing softly instead of slamming. Brooks stepped forward half a pace. "Officer Cole, you are relieved of patrol duty pending internal review," she said. Her tone was formal again now, but there was something steadier beneath it, as if the night had reminded her why procedure mattered when people did not. Cole nodded once. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply stood there in the blinking light, suddenly looking less like an officer in control of a stop and more like a young man face to face with the cost of his own unchecked instincts. Marcus reached for the door of his sedan, then paused. The street had gone so quiet that even the light tap of rain on leaves could be heard from the yards. He turned back, not for revenge, not for the last word, but because the night demanded one more truth before it ended. "Tomorrow," he said, "you are going to sit in that meeting and hear every statistic, every complaint, every policy failure laid out in front of the department. But you will not need those numbers to understand this anymore." Cole lifted his eyes. Marcus held them. "Because tonight, you became the example." No one answered. No one needed to. Brooks's grip tightened slightly on the evidence bag. The teenager on the porch looked from Marcus to Cole with the stunned stillness of someone who knew he would remember this night for years. Marcus opened his car door then, and the dome light came on soft and gold against the cold blue flashes outside. He slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and rested his hands on the wheel for one quiet second before starting the engine. In the rearview mirror, he could still see Cole standing in the rain beside Sergeant Brooks, smaller now, motionless under the spinning lights. But what Marcus saw in that reflection was not the end of the night. It was the beginning of something that would follow all of them into the morning. Morning arrived in Brookhaven without drama, which was its own kind of irony. The rain had passed before dawn, leaving the streets clean and shining, the sidewalks still dark with moisture, the trimmed hedges bright under a pale sky that looked too innocent for the weight it carried. Inside headquarters, the building smelled like coffee, printer heat, and floor polish, the ordinary scent of a place that liked to think routine could keep truth at a manageable distance. Captain Marcus Ellison walked through the front doors just before 8 o'clock wearing a fresh charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and the same calm expression he had carried on the roadside. Only the faint red marks at his wrists remained, barely visible when the light hit them the right way. He did not hide them. He did not display them either. He simply moved through the lobby with the measured pace of a man who had learned long ago that dignity did not need an announcement. Conversation softened when he passed. A desk sergeant looked up and then quickly looked down. Two patrol officers near the elevator straightened without being told. News had already traveled, not loudly, but fast. the way truth often moved inside institutions that pretended to value silence more than memory. In the conference room on the second floor, the long table was already set with printed reports, notepads, sweating plastic water cups, and a projector humming low against the far wall. The title slide waiting on the screen read Traffic Enforcement Review and Bias Response Protocol, clean black letters against a white background, official and restrained, as if the subject were theoretical rather than living. Sergeant Elena Brooks stood near the front with a sealed evidence bag on the table beside her. Inside, Cole's body camera rested in clear plastic like a small dark witness that had not yet been asked to speak. When Marcus entered, she gave him a slight nod. No performance. In front of them. No one was pretending this meeting would go as planned. Marcus set his folder on the table, placed both hands beside it, and looked around the room. Through the high windows, sunlight broke across the glass in soft rectangles, warm and quiet, the kind of light that exposed dust in the air and made every movement seem slightly slower, slightly more honest. He could have opened with reprimand. He could have named names immediately and let the room tense around the spectacle of accountability. Instead, when he spoke, his voice was low and steady, carrying the authority of a man who did not need anger to be unmistakable. "We were scheduled to discuss policy this morning," he said. Instead, policy arrived on a residential street last night and showed us exactly what happens when procedure is thinner than character. Nobody moved. The hum of the projector sounded suddenly louder. Marcus opened the folder in front of him, but he did not look down yet. His eyes rested on the officers in the room, then on the sealed evidence bag, then finally on Cole. "This department has spent years using careful language for ugly instincts," he continued. "We call it pattern recognition. We call it officer discretion. We call it proactive policing. Sometimes those things are real. Sometimes they are necessary, almost delicate. The only reason this stop did not become just another quiet wound," he said, "is that my name came across a radio before the night got any farther. And I want every person in this room to sit with that." He turned then toward Cole, not as an enemy, not even as a judge enjoying a verdict, but as a leader forcing a man to face the truth without disguise. "Officer Cole," he said, "stand up." Cole rose at once, chair legs whispering against the floor. Sunlight from the windows touched one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. Marcus watched him for a moment before speaking again. "You said something clearly last night. You admitted you made assumptions because I was a black man driving through a neighborhood where you believed I did not belong." Cole swallowed, then nodded once. "Yes, sir," he said. His voice was quiet, but unlike the night before, it did not try to shrink from the room. Marcus studied him, then gave the smallest nod in return. "That admission matters," he said. "Not because it erases anything. It does not. It matters because departments do not change when people hide behind language. They change when someone tells the truth before the truth is dragged out of them." Something shifted in the room at that. Not comfort, not relief. Something more useful. Strangers who had seen a quiet truth without needing a seminar to explain it to them. He thought about the many who had not been seen, had not been believed, had gone home carrying humiliation in silence because no radio voice had interrupted the story in time.